On the Hobo Road, I roam alone. Stars above that are far from home.
Stage 3, the hollowing. Cord and peeled, heart and soul stripped, replaced only by an empty shadow. Chapter 10, on Hope. Hope is a strange kind of fire. It burns with no wood, no fuel but breath itself, and yet it can warm you or scorch you depending on how close you stand. In homelessness, it does not arrive in grand visions or noble causes. It comes in crumbs, like a dry crust handed down in a soup line, or the promise that your EBT card will refill at midnight, the hope that it doesn't rain too hard tonight, the hope that no one stumbles across your tent, the hope that the battery in your phone will last until morning. This is not the kind of hope carved into marble and celebrated on holidays. This is brittle, transactional hope, a hope of ration tickets, of lottery numbers, of overheard promises. It doesn't sweep you off your feet. It keeps you crouched low, waiting, listening, because the smallest flicker of it is enough to keep you tethered, and the smallest betrayal of it is enough to drop you hard. And yet, there is no surviving without it. Hope has weight. It is embodied. Not scientifically, maybe, but in truth, nonetheless. It has mass in the world, like the sun pressing heat into your skin, like the cold pressing into your bones. It is an image, a theme, not a single spark, but a bundle of them tied together. To hope for a brighter future is never just to hope for one thing. It's to hope for all the things bundled up inside that word. A place to live, food you chose yourself, maybe someone to share a laugh with, maybe even a dog you can afford to feed without worrying about tomorrow. The problem is how enormous that bundle becomes when you are stripped to the bottom. To have a house someday is already a big hope for those living inside. To climb there from the ditch of homelessness is to imagine not just building a house, but first clawing out of a gorge while blindfolded, injured, and half-starved. Hope stretches too wide, and the wider it stretches, the more fragile it gets. So you learn to ration it. Not out of wisdom, but out of survival. The surest way to crush yourself is to lean on big hopes. I hope I win the lottery. I hope someone falls in love with me and saves me. I hope tomorrow erases all this. That's the kind of hope that breaks bones when it collapses. The safer path is smaller. Hope for $10 this week. Hope the storm passes. Hope the camp chair holds one more night before collapsing under you. Hope in doses you can afford. Hope is not the same as hopelessness. They might look like opposites, but they are not the same animal. Hopelessness is an abyss. Hope, even when weak, is a presence, a being that walks beside you, a spirit, if you like. It clings whether you want it or not. And sometimes you curse it because it keeps you watching, keeps you waiting, keeps you tethered when you almost want to let go. There are mornings when you wake up and it feels like hope stayed curled in the blanket with you, pressing against your ribs, nudging you to stand even when you would rather keep lying in the dirt. It has a way of whispering that today could be different, even if every sign points to the same gray routine. That whisper alone is sometimes enough to push you to lace up your shoes, to walk to the bus stop, to look at the horizon instead of the ground. There is also wishful thinking, which masquerades as hope, but is hollow. Hoping the cops don't show even though you've been posted a notice. That's not hope, that's negligence. Hope needs an anchor in reality, however small. To hope the rain eases is different from pretending the floodwaters aren't rising. One keeps you ready, the other leaves you drowned. Vigilance tempers hope, cuts it down to size. Hope can be an addiction too. That's what the lottery is about, at least for me. One ticket now and then, not enough to ruin me, but enough to play the maybe game. The odds are something like 1 in hundreds of millions, numbers I can't even really fathom, and yet it feels more believable that I could win that than that a stranger might come along and really help. Not a handout, not $100 bill, but a real commitment. Here's a spare room, here's space, here's dignity. The odds on that feel longer than the jackpot. Still, I play the ticket, not really hoping, just testing the door of fate once in a while. A knock on a locked door, knowing it won't open, but hearing the echo reminds me I still exist. There's another kind of hope I don't speak of much, silent hope, the kind you don't admit even to yourself, because to name it is to expose it to the weather. In the beginning, my silent hope was that someone would notice, Someone would see me, reach down, and pull me out. I couldn't save myself. Still can't, not really. And so I hoped for salvation. A hand extended, a chance given. That silent hope eroded over time. Reality taught me otherwise. And yet still, stories slip through. Rare tales of someone taken in, given a trailer, given a second chance. They are the exceptions that keep the ember alive. It's strange how hope can both steady you and sabotage you. One moment it sharpens your senses, makes you careful about where to camp or how to stretch your food. The next, it feeds you illusions that blur the line between real options and fantasies. Sometimes I wonder if the trick is not to avoid hope, but to hold it at arm's length, to let it glow without letting it blind. Like staring at a fire, you warm your hands but keep your eyes from burning. Hope is cruel like that. It shows you a story, whispers that maybe you could be the next one. It's like seeing someone win a jackpot on the machine you just left. Maybe if you'd stayed, maybe if you'd tried longer. Hope scratches you with that. And yet I can't shake it. I don't think anyone can. Even when I tell myself I only hope for small things, I know there's a larger silent hope hiding behind the curtain. Hope that someone sees me as human. Hope that the climb out of the gorge is still possible, even if I'll never know how. Maybe that's the hidden role of hope, not to deliver the prize, but to keep you rehearsing the motions of living. Even dashed hopes still push you into movement, still give shape to the waiting. A letter that never arrives keeps you checking the box. A meal promised and canceled still moves your feet toward the church. Even broken hope has momentum, and sometimes that momentum is what keeps you from collapsing altogether. So yes, hope is dangerous. False hope crushes ribs. Big hope cracks the skull. Silent hope gnaws you from the inside. But without it, you dry up. You stop checking the mailbox, stop looking at the horizon, stop tying your shoes in the morning. Without it, even the small steps fall away. That's the paradox. You must cling to hope even as it burns you, because hope in the end is not about winning. It's about movement. It is the breath that keeps you standing, even in the gorge, even with no ladder in sight. It's the little prayer muttered without believing, the tiny lottery ticket folded in your pocket, the image you don't admit to anyone, of four walls, a bed, maybe laughter in the next room. And hope hurts, but it's also the only thing that makes the waiting bearable, so I hold on to it as carefully as a burning coal cupped in bare hands. Not too tight or it will scorch me, not too loose or the wind will snuff it out. Just enough to see tomorrow. Chapter 11 on being invisible. Invisibility isn't magic, it's armor. It's the art of stepping sideways until the world forgets you're even there. It begins with small things, how you dress, how you move, how you vanish from the sidewalk into the tree line before headlights can pin you. It's instinct now, like breathing. You don't think, you just juke left, duck down, cross the road only when the pavement is empty, and you melt back into brush and shadows. To most people, you never existed in the first place, and that's the point. Survival means not being seen, but survival also means carrying a hollow inside you, because what's invisible is also erased. People don't nod, don't smile, don't say your name. They don't even give you the courtesy of disdain. You're not a man, you're a blur. And when you're not seen, you start wondering if you're even real. It shows up in the clothes. You don't wear loud colors or anything flashy. You choose muted, drab, safe, stealth mode activated, multiples of the same shirt, same pants, same shoes, because there's no reward in standing out. Individuality is the wrong kind of spotlight, and in this world, attention is a predator. Even when you go to Goodwill, even when you buy something cheap, you buy it for how well it blends, how quickly you can move through a crowd without sticking. You dress in camouflage, not the military kind, but the social camouflage of sameness. It creeps into the way you use space. Maybe you want to sit outside the grocery store for a while, plug your phone in, enjoy the Wi-Fi, just exist like everyone else. But 30 minutes becomes too long. Sitting by an outlet makes people notice. Lingering looks suspicious, so you move on even when you don't want to, because being noticed is dangerous currency. Stay too long and the questions come. Stay too long and someone calls security. The cost isn't just physical, it's intuitive. To be invisible is to live with your ears tuned sharp, always straining for the sound of a voice calling you out, always aware of footsteps, tires slowing, eyes following. Anxiety becomes constant background radiation. You're not resting. You're monitoring, calculating, adjusting. It changes how you carry your body, how you hear, how you breathe. It rewires your nervous system into a state of permanent readiness. And loneliness is braided into it. You don't talk much because talking invites attention. You don't sit too long in one place because sitting marks you. Even in public, you act as if you're behind enemy lines, rationing exposure like supplies. It's not solitude chosen, it's solitude enforced. Before, when you were a loner, it was a preference. Now it's a sentence. Invisibility means you are alone not because you want to be, but because safety demands it. That safety is fragile. All it takes is one hard-nosed redneck in a truck to shout when you duck into the woods. A guy throwing a bottle because they caught a glimpse of you slipping past. One cop who decides the shape of your tent is an eyesore. You disappear to survive, but the very act of being unseen draws suspicion. When you get noticed at the wrong time, the risk spikes. Every choice, where to cross a street, where to pause, how to dress, is a wager on whether you'll get through without being marked. Sometimes people mean well. A man sees you with a thrift store sleeping bag, offers a hot meal, thinks he's doing kindness, but his voice lands like a flare gun, highlighting you in the act of disappearing. Kindness at the wrong moment can still feel like being exposed, like the curtain being ripped back when all you wanted was to slip away. And then there are the others, the blue tarp crowd, the ones who plop their tents down near the road, bright as billboards. They don't bother with stealth, because for them, blending isn't the point. They exist defiantly, visibly, even if it means being rousted, even if it means being told to move every week. Maybe they can stomach that, maybe they can handle the shuffle, but for those who hide deep, who tuck themselves into wooded lots and forgotten corners, invisibility is the creed. We're the ghost census, unseen by design, unacknowledged by the city that pretends we don't exist. Imagine the cartoon of it. The city declares the streets cleaned up, National Guard patting themselves on the back, reporters nodding. But behind the trees, under the manholes, inside the skeletons of buildings, the hidden heads poke out. The loners, the stealth campers, the invisible ones who never stopped existing, who only learned how to step out of frame. The city congratulates itself on erasing the problem, but it didn't erase people. It only made them vanish from view. What does that erasure do to the soul? It's not just camouflage tents or branches piled up to break a sight line. It's the way you disappear from the human fabric. People can't see you, so they don't greet you, don't remember you, don't even notice your absence. You could vanish tomorrow, and the street would look the same, and that knowledge is corrosive. Humans aren't made to be ignored. Even introverts crave recognition at times. Some small nod that says, yes, you exist. Without it, you slip into feral rhythms. Days pass without conversation. The voice in your head becomes the only companion. You listen to audiobooks. You record YouTube videos. You keep yourself tethered to something. But outside, there's no reflection, no acknowledgement. You feel yourself disappearing, not just in the eyes of others, but in your own. The line between invisibility as strategy and invisibility as identity blurs. You become the shadow you wanted to cast. That's the danger. Safety requires invisibility, but invisibility demands silence. Silence breeds erasure, and erasure, lived long enough, becomes annihilation of self. You wake up one morning and realize you've gone days without anyone saying your name, without anyone looking you in the eye. You wanted to hide, but you didn't mean to vanish. The cruel trick is that invisibility works. It does protect. It does buy you time. The cops can't hassle what they can't find. Strangers can't harass what they don't see, but the cost is steep. You lose the right to dance loud, to walk proud, to be noticed on your own terms. You surrender individuality to stay unbothered. Some can shrug it off. They don't invest much in gear, don't care who sees them, don't care if they get rousted because they'll just move. That's their gamble. But for others, for you, the idea of being seen sleeping, being known, is unbearable. You build defenses. You invest in the tent, in camouflage, in staying hidden. You refuse to let strangers know where you rest your head, and in that refusal, You vanish further, sometimes more than you ever meant to. Being invisible keeps you alive. It also starves the soul. That's the paradox. To survive, you disappear. But in disappearing, you lose the very human need to be recognized, acknowledged, spoken to as if you matter. It's survival by subtraction. And subtraction carried long enough becomes a hollowing, a slow unmaking of self. Chapter 12. On Numbness. There comes a time in the long slog of homelessness when I didn't cry anymore, when the grief and rage that once tore at me lost their teeth. It isn't that the world had become kinder or that my situation had improved. It's that the mind finally flips a switch. Numbness arrives like an anesthetic, a dulling shield I never asked for but desperately needed. Pain became background noise. Fear, grief, and loneliness all muted themselves into a static haze, and I moved through the days like a shadow. In some ways it was a relief not to feel, because the alternative would have been to bleed every morning, to wake raw and gutted, and no one can survive that kind of exposure for long. What people on the outside never understand is that numbness is not the same as giving up. It is not nihilism or hopelessness. It is survival at its most stripped down. It is the body and mind declaring a ceasefire, saying, enough. You don't have the energy to grieve every tarp that collapses in the rain, every stare from someone who looks at you like a stain. I patched the hole in my tent with duct tape, lashed a cord across the frame, and called it good enough. Good enough became a mantra in this stage, because I no longer chased perfection or comfort. I just wanted the night to pass, the rain to stop, the silence to settle. I told myself, this will do, it has to. The days lost their shape in this hollowing. Gray merged into gray until I couldn't tell one week from another. People blurred into faceless bodies passing by. The sameness was crushing, but also merciful, because sameness meant no surprises, no fresh wounds. You reach for distractions that smooth over the edges. Food becomes something you don't savor, just consume to quiet your body. Sometimes I ate more than I should, chocolate, bread, whatever sugar and carbs were cheap, because it made me heavy and tired, and sleep was one of the only gifts numbness still allowed. Music became another tool, but not the songs that once meant something. I chose trance, techno, EDM, sounds that didn't pull at my heart, beats that washed over me without demanding an emotional response. It was music as wallpaper, music as anesthesia. Escapes became essential, and they don't always have to be noble. Offline games on a phone let you build a small kingdom where progress is measured in levels and achievements instead of survival and shame. You create characters who live in fantasy or sci-fi worlds where hunger is part of the plot, not a daily terror, and homelessness is rebranded as adventuring. There is power in imagining yourself as a traveler with purpose, even if it is digital make-believe. In those hours, I was not just a man in a tent with duct tape and paracord. I was someone stronger, someone with a quest, someone whose suffering could be reframed as heroism. And sometimes that illusion was enough to get me through, and other times the escape was quieter. Audiobooks became voices in my skull, stories that allowed me to walk into another life entirely. I binge-watched television shows when I could, losing myself in characters who carried the weight of emotion so I didn't have to. It wasn't just a distraction, it was relief. To feel someone else's story without having to bear my own for a few hours was a mercy. I let them do the crying, the raging, the hoping. I just sat and watched until the episode ended and sleep took me. And sleep itself became a form of escape as well, a curtain I could draw against the constant sameness. Sometimes I welcomed it too eagerly, eating myself into drowsiness, letting exhaustion pull me under, because in those hours I was free from choice, from shame, from the effort of simply existing. Holidays were the cruelest test of numbness because they arrived wrapped in expectations of joy, family, and hope. When you don't have any of that, the season becomes unbearable. I walked past decorations and felt nothing but an ache I couldn't name. I bought a bottle of rum at Christmas once just to dull the edge, to blur the lights and quiet the hunger for what wasn't there. I didn't let it become a habit, but in that moment I understood perfectly why so many reach for bottles or pills. Numbness is easier to swallow when it comes in liquid form, when it carries you far enough away to forget that tomorrow will be exactly the same. The world tells you the season is about miracles, but when you live in a tent, the only miracle is surviving until spring. Walking was another form of escape, though it looked like penance. I learned that back in 2015, when I walked across America with nothing but a cart and my exhaustion, walking stripped everything down. Step after step, it forced thoughts to untangle or at least wear themselves out. Sometimes it felt like punishment, sometimes like purification. When numbness grew too thick, when the tent felt like a coffin, I forced myself to cross town to the library and back. It didn't matter if it was hot or rainy. Sometimes I went anyway. Movement cleared a path. By the time I returned, I was sore, tired, and ready to collapse. That exhaustion became my reprieve. I ate something heavy, let the carbs drag me down, and I finally slept without feeling. And sometimes the rhythm of footsteps was enough to stir the faintest memory of purpose, a reminder that I was still moving, even if the destination had long been forgotten. The weight of numbness is not always obvious to others, but I felt it pressing on my chest. I knew I was missing pieces of myself. I knew that laughter should have come easier, that joy should still have been possible, but the hollowness blocked it. And yet there was a strange safety in the silence. Numbness meant I was no longer a raw nerve exposed to every cruelty of the world. It was armor, even if it was also a prison. I learned to live with the absence because in the absence was at least the possibility of endurance. And if endurance was all I had left, then endurance was enough. I didn't dream of thriving. I didn't reach for greatness. I simply lasted, and lasting became its own bitter victory. People say time heals all wounds, but what they don't say is that healing often requires numbness first. You can't stitch a wound while it's still bleeding. You can't rebuild your spirit while every nerve is screaming. Sometimes you need the silence. Sometimes you need the emptiness. It doesn't mean you're broken forever. It means you are waiting. My soul had retreated, biding its time until it was safe to return. There is no timetable for this, no calendar where you can mark the day of re-entry. Healing hides in the unseen hours, in the unnoticed weeks, until one day you realize you've felt something again without being destroyed by it. That is when you know the exile is ending. But not everyone comes back from that. Some stay numb for years, decades even, lost in the static. I've seen it in others, and I've felt the pull myself. It is tempting to stay where nothing hurts, even if nothing shines. It is tempting to surrender to the stillness and call it peace, even though it is really absence. You convince yourself that feeling nothing is safer than risking pain, that comfort in hollowness is better than the possibility of loss. And yet there is always a small part of you that hopes for the thaw, that waits for the day when you feel again, when music pierces you, when laughter surprises you, when tears fall without shame. That hope is what keeps the hollowing from being the end. Numbness is a paradox. It protects even as it starves. It grants peace even as it steals vitality. It makes life bearable even as it makes life empty. To live in it is to drift, suspended, neither drowning nor breathing freely. I tell myself it is temporary, a reprieve, a kind of vacation from feeling. I trust, or at least I pretend to trust, that one day my soul will walk back into the room and settle into me again. Until then, I endure in the silence, in the hollowing, in the strange mercy of not caring. And if caring never returns in full, if the thaw never quite arrives, then at least I know I found a way to keep moving through the storm with whatever scraps of strength remained. In its own twisted way, numbness is both the absence of life and the stubborn continuation of it. Chapter 13, On Resentment. Resentment is the quiet acid that seeps into the bones when promises turn to dust. It is the taste left behind when you swallow the story of a country that swore it had your back, only to watch it step aside when you finally stumbled. They told you there was a system, a net woven from all those taxes taken, a hand waiting for the moment when you could no longer stand. But the hand was a ghost, the net was made of smoke, and the fall cracked you open. It is not anger that burns brightest, it is betrayal. You gave years, you gave wages, you gave belief, and what comes back is the sneer of a cashier when you use your EBT card, the murmur of strangers who call you a leech. What comes back is the hollow reassurance of politicians who polish their speeches with words like safety net and compassion while the shelters stay full, the waiting lists stretch decades, and the streets grow crowded with those erased. Resentment rises not because you wanted riches, but because you were told there was something and it turns out to be nothing. You think of taxes the way a worker thinks of clocking in each morning. 20%, sometimes more, carved out before you touched it, sent upward into the machine. You didn't complain about paying into things you hardly ever used, things others depended on more than you did. You understood the deal. You give. And one day, if needed, it gives back. But when the hour came, when your body weakened, when age and illness and collapse bore down, the return on your investment was a cold shoulder, like a company that takes 20 years of your labor, then cuts you loose without even a handshake. Your country handed you silence. Resentment festers because it cannot find a target that will answer. You want to scream at the government, but the government is not a face, not a name. It is a wall with no ears, a stone courthouse where your voice is just another echo. You want to shout at the citizens who tut and sneer, but they pass by quickly, shoulders turned, eyes averted, pretending you are not there. You want to rage at yourself for believing, for paying, for trusting, but that rage cuts deepest because it confirms the one thing you never wanted to believe, that you were naive to hope. And so resentment corrodes. It chews through connection, makes the handshake a suspicious gesture, makes every offer of help feel like a trap. It eats away at trust until you are left alone, bitter and hollow, half wanting someone to care, half daring them to try. Because if you open again, if you trust again, if you believe again, won't the betrayal just taste even sharper? Better to close the gates than to risk another wound. Still, the body remembers. You remember paying into the pot year after year. You remember standing in line at the polls, being told your voice mattered, your contribution counted. You remember working shifts, cashing paychecks, watching a fifth vanish before it ever touched your hand. That memory collides with the present, a torn tent in the woods, a card with a meager balance, the sideways glance of a clerk. Resentment is born from that collision, the crash between the story you were told and the reality you live. They say you can tell the soul of a nation by how it treats its weakest. By that measure, the verdict is already written. What do you see? Evictions disguised as cleanups. Laws that criminalize sleeping where there is no shelter to be had. Charities that burn more on paperwork than bread. Resentment grows not only from what is denied, but from the insult layered on top, the way survival itself is painted as a crime. You resent the hunger, yes, but you resent even more the attention that treats your hunger as spectacle. There is a helplessness under resentment, a small voice that admits you cannot change this machine. You cannot fight the tide of policy or the indifference of crowds. You cannot claw back the years of taxes, cannot demand a refund on your life's investment. So resentment becomes the armor. You wear it not because it saves you, but because without it, the despair would eat you alive. It is easier to be bitter than broken, easier to sneer back than to beg. Yet bitterness costs too. It hollows you from the inside. You wake with clenched teeth, your stomach knotted, replaying the scorn, the betrayal, the indifference. The body absorbs resentment like rust, and trust erodes with it. People who might have been allies become suspects. Kindness feels like pity. Connection feels like a setup. This corrosion is the hidden toll, the price of living in a society that told you one story and delivered another. And beneath it all lies envy, a wound that stings sharpest. Not envy for mansions or yachts. That was never your world. But envy for the ordinary, for the ease of someone who clocks out, goes home, and knows there will be heat, a roof, a bed. Envy for those who treat groceries as casual, not survival. Envy for those who never wonder if tonight's rain will soak through the seams of a tent. Resentment and envy are siblings bound together. One looks backward at what was promised, the other sideways at what others still have. Together they leave you raw. Still, resentment is unfinished. It does not resolve. It never finds the clean burn of closure. You cannot confront a nation the way you confront a single person. There is no moment of reconciliation, no apology, no watch handed at retirement. Instead, resentment lingers like a low fever, flaring when you hear the latest speech, when you see the newest budget, when you walk past another campaign sign. It lives in the gap between what should be and what is, and the gap never closes. What do you do with that? You carry it. Some days it fuels you, keeps you sharp, gives you a spine when despair would fold you in half. Other days it poisons you, drives you deeper into isolation, makes you push away the few hands that still reach. There is no neat ending, no bow tied around this bitterness. Resentment is part of the hollowing, part of the slow corrosion that stage 3 brings. It does not kill you outright. It wears you down grain by grain until trust, connection, and hope are worn thin as paper. And yet even here, resentment is proof of something. proof that you once believed, proof that you once trusted, proof that you once thought there was a covenant between you and your country, between you and your fellow citizens. Resentment cannot exist without that belief. It is the shadow of faith betrayed. If you were truly hollow, there would be no resentment at all, only silence. So you sit with it, you let it seethe, knowing it will not heal. You bear it like scar tissue, a reminder of what was promised and what was lost. And perhaps that is its only gift, the clarity it leaves behind, the recognition that the system was never designed for you, the knowledge that your worth was measured only in labor and taxes, never in dignity. It is not comfort, it is not closure, but it is truth, and sometimes truth is all that survives. Resentment, then, is the last echo of trust, a bitter song that will not fade, a hollowed-out hymn to a country that swore it had your back, then turned away, and you, standing here, still singing it under your breath because silence would feel like giving in. Chapter 14, On Hopelessness. Hopelessness is the first shadow that sticks. When disbelief fades, when shock recedes, hopelessness steps in like a permanent roommate who doesn't pay rent and doesn't leave. It is not loud. It doesn't knock on the door. It seeps in, it slides into your bones until even the marrow feels heavier than it should. You don't need a dictionary for it, you just know. You wake up under it, go to sleep under it, and the hours in between are framed by its edges. Hopelessness is not the opposite of hope. That would be too simple. Hope has a kind of warmth, even when misplaced, even when naive. Hopelessness is different. It is the awareness that you tried to hope, that you pushed at the edges of possibility, that you told yourself stories about maybe, and those stories rotted in your hands. It's not unhope. It's exhausted hope. It's hope that has run a marathon on shattered knees and collapsed at the finish line, only to discover there is no medal, no water station, no finish line at all, just more pavement stretching forever. You do the math in your head. Numbers don't lie, but they don't comfort either. With this much money, with these circumstances, with these limits in body and mind, there is no escape hatch. Hopelessness is when the math adds up to zero every time. You could scratch equations into the dirt with a stick, change the variables, rearrange the numbers, but the sum never bends. Chronically homeless, permanently outside, the outcome locked in before you even get to shuffle the deck. And when you accept that, not in a philosophical sense, but in the concrete weight of daily life, hopelessness becomes the constant companion, the one voice you can rely on to never betray you, because betrayal requires the possibility of something better first. Hopelessness is the weight of silence. At first you speak about your situation, you explain, you justify, you plan, you talk to friends, strangers, even yourself. Then the words dry up. They sound rehearsed, empty. You realize everything that can be said has been said, every thought has been thought, and so the silence grows heavier. It's not a meditative silence, not the kind people chase in yoga studios or monasteries. It's a silence that presses down on the chest, makes you aware of your own breathing. It leaves you empty, not empty in the sense of hungry, but empty like a cavern that will never echo again. Other weights can be carried, a stone in the shoe can be shaken out, a weight in the heart at least tells you something is alive in there. But hopelessness is different. It leaves nothing. It tells you nothing will fill you. That every drink of water is just a sip, never a quenching. Every moment of light is only a flicker, never a sunrise. Even joy, when it visits, is reduced to a temporary hallucination, gone before you even trust it. Hopelessness whispers that nothing permanent will ever arrive, that permanence belongs to others. The old story of Pandora's box said that when the lid was lifted, all the horrors of the world flew free, and only hope remained. People like to quote that as if it's a promise that hope is invincible. But the darker reading is that hope is just another cruelty. Hope survives because it tortures you longer than despair alone could. Hopelessness knows this. It isn't the absence of hope. It's the live-through moment when you realize you've been teased too many times by hope, that the question, maybe, has been asked and answered again and again, until the answer hardens into a permanent no. Hopelessness has a logic. It feels scientific, clinical, like Newton's laws, like kinetic energy. For every dream imagined, there is an equal and opposite disappointment. For every plan drawn, a counterforce erases it. The equation is brutally consistent. Input everything you have, output nothing that matters. And that's where hopelessness separates itself from despair. Despair still screams. Hopelessness doesn't bother. It just folds its arms and tells you flatly that you already know the outcome, that shouting won't change it. You want purpose. You want meaning. That's the dangerous part. Hopelessness isn't a lack of desire. The desire remains. You still long for a finish line, a shape to the road, a point where you can look back and say, yes, I gave it a good shot. But hopelessness tells you that no matter how many steps you take, the path never ends. And the further you walk, the more it loops back into itself. You don't get the dignity of closure. You get an infinite hallway with no exit signs, and your legs still ache anyway. It is a heartache that doesn't scab over. It doesn't reduce with time like grief sometimes does. It keeps reopening, an open wound you carry daily. Futility binds itself to hopelessness until they are indistinguishable. It is not passive futility either. It is belligerent. You try, you force yourself to try, and the result mocks you every time. The more you push, the more hopelessness laughs. A hurt that insists on itself, that refuses to be reasoned with, refuses to be outplanned. Murphy's Law feels almost cheerful compared to it. That saying, if something can go wrong, it will, has a kind of gallows humor in it. But hopelessness takes it further. It's not about the little stumbles, the daily bad luck. It's about the archetype of failure, the larger patterns. Not today the bus was late, but in the life you dream of, the bus never arrives at all. Hopelessness tells you that the person you most wanted to be, the one you imagine in the quiet, the one you hoped tomorrow would shape, doesn't exist anymore. That person has been erased by repetition, by disappointment, by time. What remains is someone harder, smaller, more resigned. A soul cornered into survival mode, unable to make grand choices because futility hangs over every option. Hopelessness is paradoxical in one more way. It does not extinguish hope completely. They can coexist. You can feel hopelessness and still hold a fragile flame of hope in the same breath. But it's an unstable mixture. Hope becomes the child in the abusive home, always waiting for the blow, never trusting the rare smile. Hopelessness sits beside it, whispering, reminding, correcting. And over time, hope becomes quieter, almost embarrassed to exist. Hopelessness doesn't win by erasing hope. It wins by humiliating it until it shrivels into something unrecognizable. There are days when hopelessness doesn't crush you, when you function, when you move through the steps, eat, walk, set up camp, rest. On those days, hopelessness is background radiation, invisible but omnipresent. You don't notice it directly, but you know it's shaping you, eroding you, molecule by molecule. Other days it swells and you feel it in your stomach, your throat, your joints. On those days you can't even pretend. Futility fogs your vision, and the hours blur into one unbroken stretch of waiting. Waiting for what? Even hopelessness doesn't answer that. Waiting for the next day to repeat. What hopelessness ultimately does is flatten time. There's no long view. The horizon contracts into the span of a single night. Just make it through tonight. Just survive until tomorrow. But that tomorrow isn't anticipated. It isn't longed for. It's just endured. And when you stack enough of those tomorrows together, life becomes a sequence of placeholders, not a story. No arc, no climax, no redemption. Just the calendar filling itself with days that don't mean anything. Hopelessness strips language bare. You stop making promises to yourself. You stop describing the future in glowing terms. You stop daydreaming about next year. Your vocabulary shrinks. Words like someday, maybe, when I get back on my feet, fall out of circulation. What remains are blunt words. Today, cold, tired, hungry. And when language collapses like that, identity does too. You start to become the words you use. You start to become only the now, only the need. Hope once wrote you in paragraphs. Hopelessness reduces you to fragments. The cruelest part is that hopelessness feels honest. You can distrust hope as a liar. You can call it wishful thinking. But hopelessness feels like truth. It sits there, unadorned, factual. It tells you there's no miracle coming, no rescue, no reversal. And because it feels honest, it gains authority. You defer to it, you stop arguing with it, and once you stop arguing, it becomes law. You live by it, you measure yourself by it, you wear it like a uniform. In the end, hopelessness doesn't even need to raise its voice. It doesn't need to threaten or punish. It just stays. It embeds itself. It becomes the atmosphere of your days. And when you try to imagine life without it, you can't. You wonder if you even want to, because at least hopelessness is consistent, dependable in its way. At least you know where you stand with it. And so it sits, patient, eternal, waiting for you to realize that you and it are no longer separate. That hopelessness is not beside you. It is you.